So how do you know when your African violets need water? The easiest way is you look at the surface of the soil, and if it looks almost completely dry, not totally dry, but almost completely dry. So when you're looking at this plant here, you can see that the soil has a little bit of moisture in it from that sort of darker area, but most of it is relatively dry, and that's what you want. That's a plant telling you that it's ready, it needs some water. You do not want to over soak it. What you can also do to check if it's ready to be watered, because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see the surface of the soil with an African violet because you've got a whole leaf cover covering it. What you can do is you just get your finger and you push your finger down around around 5 centimeters into the soil. And if that soil is dry or almost dry, you want it to be almost dry, not completely dry, almost dry, then your plant is ready to be watered. Now to water it, you can use like a little nozzle. And the other question is, how much water do you give it? You don't drown it. African violets come from Africa. They don't need a huge amount of water. If you give them too much water, they will die. So a small amount of water, and there's no regular schedule. You can't say, I hear a lot of people say, I water my African violets once a week, every Sunday. Not a good idea. The best way to water your African violets is to check each one individually, because they're all individual plants. Some are larger, smaller than others. Some will need a slightly more water than others because the different varieties are different. They have different needs. So make sure you do not overwater them. So when you're watering them, you want to just give them enough that you wet the surface a little bit. And that's it. That's all you need to do. Don't overwater them. They don't need a huge amount of water. This will keep them happy. This will keep them happy. This will stop them from getting root rot, which is so common. Now, I use just straight African violet mix because where I live, that works best for my climate, but that may not be right for where you live. So do some research, find out what's the best sort of soil, and because the different amounts of perlite or vermiculite or whatever you're using in your soil will affect how much water also you give your plants. So often people will say, once a week I water my plants on a Sunday, every Sunday. That's not good practice to do that, because you might have one plant that doesn't need that extra amount of water within 7 days. So best to do that finger test to check into the soil to see if it's almost dry, and when it's almost dry, that's the time to water your plants. Never before. If the soil's already wet or quite moist, what will happen is if you then water it again before it's had an opportunity to completely dry out the soil, you're really making your plant susceptible to root rot. And then you can have things like your leaves will start getting droopy and your plant will be very, very unhappy. So I hope this video helps. If it is always better to underwater your African violets than to overwater them. So that's a really important thing to remember. Underwater, don't overwater. So if you see your plant and you think, oh, I'm not really sure if it needs water, I did water it the other day, I don't know, do the finger test and check if that soil is drying out almost underneath the surface. If it is, then water it. But if you're not sure, better to err on the side of caution and leave it an extra day and then water, because I guarantee you your plants will be a lot happier than being overwatered, which they absolutely hate. So I hope this video helps. I hope this helps you work out when you're supposed to be watering your African violets and when you can't. And I also hope, and my biggest hope for all of these videos that I'm sharing with people, is that I will save the life of an African violet somewhere in the world, because I have killed many over the years when I started out, and that was just because I didn't understand what their needs were and I was following instructions of what people were telling me. but it wasn't working for my climate and my environment. So what I'm sharing with you are basic rules that will work for anyone in the world who is growing African violets, that the watering needs will be different for different areas. But if you do that, check with your finger under the soil to see if it's drying out almost, then anyone in the world, that's when your plant will need to be given water, but never, ever, ever a huge amount of water. And the other really important thing for watering African violets is it's always filtered water. Don't ever use chlorinated water. Tank water would be okay. And you can get pH tests to check the soil pH if you're really pedantic and if you're concerned about that. If you feel that you need to do that, you can get those testing kits and check. I have a reverse osmosis water filter system, and that strips all of the chemicals out of the water. It does have a remineralizer on it, and I find that just works really well for my African violets. I've never had any problems with water quality or anything. If you can get one of those, that's great. But if not, then just you can use bottled water, or you can use tank water, or even just put some buckets outside and collect some rainwater. That would be my biggest recommendation, because it's free and everything else costs too much. So put some buckets out, collect rainwater, use it on your plants. And if you have the other thing is an aquarium pond. I have a goldfish pond, and I do use watered down the old water out of my goldfish pond. I do use that on my plants, but that's only for freshwater fish. So if you have a saltwater fish tank, don't use that water on your African violets, because the salt level will be too high. But if you have a pond, you can use that water to water your African violets with, and probably around once a month, because it is quite high in nitrogen. And you'll find that if you use pond water on your African violets, you'll have amazing leaf growth, because leaves need nitrogen to grow really strong and healthy. But you'll be less likely to get blooms then, because your blooms need potassium, higher amounts of potassium to flower really happily. So don't always use the pond water on your plants all the time, because your plant will then put all its energy into growing beautiful foliage, and you'll have lovely foliage plants. But like everyone, you have your African violets because of the flowers, and you want to see that beautiful flower growth. So definitely don't use too much of the pond water, and always try and use filtered water or water that doesn't have chlorine in it to water your plants. And the biggest lesson that I really want everyone to take away is do not overwater your African violets. You're better to underwater than overwater. So I hope this information helps, and I hope that it makes it a little bit easier caring for your African violets. And if you do that, you will get some beautiful happy blooms like these ones. So I hope this information helps, and thank you very much for watching.